Thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Justin Seitz. I lead up the team here at Hunchly. And today we are going to be running through kind of a front to back tour of Hunchly 232. So this is our new release that just went out last week. There's been some kind of improvements in the interface. A lot of the other stuff remains the same, all of our core fun stuff in Hunchly. So we're just going to be taking a kind of a cruise through everything, a couple of housekeeping items. First off, this will be recorded, so don't worry if you have to drop or you run into any issues. A recording will be available on YouTube when we're done. The other thing is that I encourage you to ask questions as we go. Use the question and answers box. I will take kind of short little breaks to address any questions or comments that you leave there. We should be out of here at the top of the hour, but there are times where lots of questions will lead to lots of discussion and that can run over. So don't worry about holding any questions back. Fire away with all of them and I'll do my best to get through them. All right, so let's get going. And as I said, I hope that you can see my screen and you can hear me loud and clear. What we're looking at currently is the Hunchly dashboard. So when you first install Hunchly, if you've never used it before, the first place folks often go is their desktop and they see this Hunchly dashboard and they double click it and it pops this open. Now, on a fresh installation of Hunchly, there's not going to be anything here to look at, right? We haven't captured any pages or done anything, but you will note that we have this default case called the unassigned case. This case will always exist. It is there as kind of a stopgap so that if you end up capturing some materials and you don't have a case set up, they're going to get filed away here. Now, good practice when we're using Hunchly is, of course, to break everything out into cases. So everybody's workflow is slightly different here. How you kind of create new cases and what you deem a case is largely up to you. But it's very simple to create a new case so that we can use it just for the purposes of this demo today. So by clicking on this menu in the top left, I can now say New Case. Now, for all of our webinars, we always investigate me for maximum embarrassment. So I'm going to hit Save. And that's it. This is literally all you need to do to get started in the dashboard, is just create a new case so that when you're capturing materials, they're being stored in the right place. All right, now we're actually ready to start using the other half of Hunchly, which is our Chrome extension. And the important thing here is that it doesn't have to be just Chrome, but it has to be a Chromium-based browser. So I'm going to use Google Chrome today for this demo, and that's what I use generally. But it'll work with Chromium, Chrome itself, Microsoft Edge. So that's installed by default now in your Windows installation. So Microsoft Edge is now based on Chromium. And of course, you can use Brave as well, which is a more privacy-focused browser that a lot of investigators really enjoy using. So let's fire up the browser and I'll show you what we got. All right, so here's my browser. Now, you'll notice where your extensions typically live up here in the top right, I don't see a Hunchly extension, but I do see this little puzzle piece. So I'm going to click that, and we can see Hunchly 2 is living right here, but it's not showing up in our extension bar. So just a quick little pin right there. Clicking that pin will actually force the Hunchly extension to stay up here. This is how I use it. I prefer to have it kind of at the ready for me so I can keep an eye on it. And if we click the extension, there's a couple of things to note. The first is this capture toggle. So currently Hunchly's automatic capture system is turned off. And what we want when we're investigating is we want that turned on. This means that everywhere you browse, Hunchly will be coming along behind you, capturing every page, timestamping it, hashing it, and storing it on your local hard drive. So it does this automatically. You don't have to think about it. Now, there are investigators out there that use Hunchly with the capture turned off and they manually capture using our right-click menu. Definitely something I can show you. However, I recommend using the full capture kind of in automatic mode just to be more thorough when you're investigating. So that's the first click we want here, is we want to turn this on in the extension, and then we want to pick the correct case. So we can pick Justin Seitz here. You can switch between cases as you're working. And don't worry, if you ever capture materials into the wrong case, you can always move them later in the dashboard very easily. All right, so a couple of clicks in the dashboard to get a new case set up. A couple of clicks here just to make sure our Chrome extension is up and running and the capture mode is going. And now I can actually train you how to do capture with it. So I'm just going to head to google.com proper. And that's it. So that's really all that it takes for training you on how to capture pages with Hunchly. Just the act of browsing to google.com triggered the automatic capture. It's captured this page, all the images and everything for you as well. Now, of course, it's not too useful to just look at Google. So let's actually capture another page inside and get some search results. So it's important to know when I say that Hunchly does this capture is that it's actually pulling all this text, all the images, everything is going into the capture file all at once. So the other nice thing too, as we'll see shortly, is that it preserves things like links. And so you know, for example, when you've preserved a page that might be 6 months old, you can come back and you know exactly where that link points. So you don't get that with screenshots because screenshots don't actually capture where this particular link points, for example. It's just a picture of it. So this is really handy. And now the cool thing is that as we kind of move along through our investigation, Hunchly is just going to keep capturing, doing its thing all automatically for us in the background. All right, so let's pop back to the dashboard and take a look at what we have now. All right, so we can see that now these counters have increased. I've viewed 2 pages, I've done 1 search. And down here is your history view. So your history view is the breadcrumb trail of where you have been in this case, the things that you've been capturing and looking at. You can sort this view. You can also filter it based on keyword if you want, if you have a long history or trying to find a particular site that you browse to and you want to go take a look at it. And by clicking on an item in the history view, this takes us into our page review screen. So in our page review screen, this is where we can actually look at the materials we captured. And this is really like your own Wayback Machine. So this is always going to look the same 6 months from now, a year from now. This is all this content is stored locally on my hard drive permanently. So as long as I have a copy of this case somewhere, I'm always going to be able to know what the Google search result for my name on this day looked like. So this is really handy. It's not loading any remote resources. It's not communicating to the internet in any way, shape, or form. And if we're really thinking about if we have to explain a story as a journalist, if we have to, for example, testify in a court case, all of the real critical information is here for us. So we know what we saw, where we saw it, which is the URL, and by expanding this panel, we can see the rest of the information that's critical, namely, when did we see it? So the date and timestamp. Now you'll notice we have 2 rows here. We have the date here and an updated date. So the reason for that is when we land on google.com at 12:06, the entire page is loaded all at once. There's no kind of dynamic content. It doesn't matter if I scroll up or down, nothing's going to change on that page. And that's why we get this updated timestamp that looks exactly the same. Nothing changed. However, when we're browsing on Instagram, Twitter, or other places, we might be on a page for a while kind of scrolling around. And as more and more updates are occurring, to that page, Hunchly will update this timestamp here. Okay, so you'll get this updated timestamp telling you the last time you were on that page and it updated. Now, this is actually a good time to talk about Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook in particular, because you can run into some interesting capture problems on those sites. So it's worth actually covering this because I get asked about this a lot, so does our team. So let me demonstrate what I actually mean by this. I'm just gonna have to pause for 1 second and I am going to get authenticated to my Instagram account and I'm going to show you the problem. All right. Yes, we'll log in. Just play some Jeopardy music right here if you like. All right. Don't worry, the screen will be frozen for just a moment while I get logged in. All right, cool. All right, let's resume. Cool. All right. So I'm on Instagram.com/AmberMac. Okay, so let's do a little test here. We start scrolling down, and if we kind of pay attention to this top leftmost image, or even this pair of images here, okay, with amber in them. All right, so as we scroll down, does anybody want to have a guess at what we expect to see in our capture? Do we expect to see all of these images we've looked at as one gigantic page? Or what do we expect? Because for me, I expect to see one giant long page capture. right? Because that's what it feels like when I'm scrolling, and the scroll bar is getting smaller, moving down the page. What a cute dog. But let's take a look at what we actually have. Okay, let's take a look here. All right, so there's Amber Mac. Everything looks good so far. Where did all the images go? Right, you see this? I'm scrolling, but I'm not seeing those top leftmost images. Scroll, 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 and now we have content again. So this is really interesting. And it's not just Instagram. So Twitter, Facebook, other large social media sites, or anything that's like very busy, or kind of one of these platforms where performance or minimal bandwidth counts, you're going to see similar results. Now, the reason for this is back in the day, when you would capture an Instagram profile, it would be one gigantic page. And you would actually even notice your browser start to slow down. If they had like hundreds or thousands of posts, same for Facebook, you'd start scrolling down and it would just keep adding more content to the bottom of the page. So you would have like all these images and like video previews and all this stuff. And so what happened was in the last couple of years, Instagram and others have changed how they actually present content to you. Now, what happens is, as I scroll down this page, we have about anywhere between 12 and 15, 16 images at any given time on the page. That's it. As I scroll those images above out, Instagram actually unloads them. So they're not there anymore. And it's like a little magic trick that they're using. As I scroll down, they're unloading stuff at the top, they're loading more stuff in the bottom. And as I scroll up, they do the reverse. They unload the stuff at the bottom and they reload the stuff at the top. So this provides you with a more seamless experience because you don't end up with this massive page. It also saves on bandwidth for them, but it creates this interesting problem where all we get, for Hunchly's sake, is the last updated capture. And this is actually technically accurate from an evidence perspective because these are the only images that are on the page right now. That's it. It isn't that it's missed anything, it's just literally that's what it looks like. So how do we address this from an evidence perspective and a capture perspective? All right, so we're going to go into our Hunchly settings. And right here we have this page capture sensitivity. By default, it's major changes only. Okay, so that's your normal operating procedure with Hunchly. I'm going to switch it to all changes. It's worth mentioning when you switch settings in Hunchly that it can take a bit for the browser to kind of get synchronized with the Hunchly backend. So what I will do just to save time is I'm going to punt the browser and I'm just going to go back in so it picks the newest settings up much quicker. And we're going to head back there. So what's going to change? So instead of Hunchly updating that same capture over and over, kind of overwriting those images, what you're going to see now is a lot more captures coming out of Hunchly. So as these pictures stay in place, Hunchly will create a capture. As they unload, Hunchly will create another capture and another one and another one. So you're going to see your history view get a lot more busy. It's also going to consume more hard drive space because we are capturing more copies of that page, as you can see here. But the great thing is you're not going to miss anything. So you're not going to have a situation where you're missing these images at the top. It's going to ensure that Hunchly's actually captured every one of those major scroll events and make sure that it's filing away each of those pages. The downside, the trade-off, is that instead of having one nice file like we used to, you get about 5, 6, 10, it might be more. So some investigators will leave this setting on permanently. Everywhere they go, they'll just leave it running like that. It's going to generate a lot more captures, but on a modern machine, big hard drives, it's not that much of an issue. My workflow, I generally will actually flip it on and off. So it's a bit more onerous to have to remember to come in here and do this. But that's what I do is I'll just come in and flip it on and off depending on what I'm doing. Or if I have to jump into a bunch of social media related stuff all at once, I'll turn it on, do all that work, and then turn it back off again. So that will ensure that you're capturing every image that you want from an Instagram profile, from Facebook and other places. and it does still maintain all of the evidence standards. So there is no Instagram profile that has 100 pictures all loaded at once. That actually doesn't, that's not how Instagram works anymore. So that's a great question. Is there a hotkey to turn it on and off? That's a fantastic suggestion, actually. I will note that as a potential feature request. I had not contemplated that before. Toggle. All right, thank you. Any other questions before I continue about page capture, some of these social media things before I move on? All right, I'm just looking here. Okay. All right, cool. And another great suggestion, having page capture sensitivity set for specific domains. That's actually something we contemplated internally. I like that. Thank you for that suggestion. I'm going to count that as a vote. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So I've had a few folks actually mentioning hotkeys, and Hunchly does have hotkeys, by the way. So if you go into Chrome extensions, all right, what you can do is you can click on this menu in the top left, go into keyboard shortcuts. Whoops, I right click there. So we actually have some commands here. So you can take a note, capture a page, activate the extension, so it pops it open, toggle auto capture as well. So if I wanted to manually capture a page, again, as I mentioned before, I can actually set my own, so I'll be like Control Shift V, how about? So I can set that there. And then when I'm out, if I don't want to have that automatic capture on, I can turn that off. And then, for example, I can go to, we'll just go to support.hunch.ly. So Hunchly is not capturing right now, but I can either use a right click and go into the Hunchly 2 menu and say capture. That will force one, or I can use that newly created hotkey, Control Shift B, and that captured it as well. So I should have two captures for support.hunch.ly. There we go. All right, cool. All right, awesome. I saw a couple of other questions there too that I will address as we move a little deeper into the demo. No other questions about page capture, it looks like. All right, let us move on. So that's the core fundamental piece of Hunchly. That's its main job. That's what we spend countless hours agonizing over, is that capture and making sure it's working and making sure we're able to kind of keep up with all of the crazy changes going on out there. Now we can talk about ways to make your investigation smoother, more organized, and that's really the bulk of the rest of this presentation for the most part. So the first thing, by far one of my favorite things in Hunchly, is the selector system. So selectors are right here in your dashboard, and they're keywords that describe the subject of your investigation. So what can that mean? Well, for example, we can add Justin Sites. So that is a very relevant keyword for this particular investigation. We might also add a social media username. You could put in an email address if you wanted. Anything at all that's relevant to the subject of your investigation. Now, there's a couple of things that's going to happen here. The first is when you add a new selector, Hunchly is searching backwards through your case, looking for any instances of it. We can see it actually has a count 1 right there. And what that's telling you is that somewhere back here in your history, you had Justin Sites and also JMS.py in this case appear on that page. So to smooth things out, you can click a selector and that will filter your history view. So it'll help you kind of drill down into any pages that contain that selector hit, and you can mix and match them as well if you want. So any page that had both these terms on them, for example. This is also useful if you are investigating like a group or a gang, for example. So we could say Esme Sites, that's my cat. So if you ever wanted to see pages where both Justin and Esme were present, maybe they were talking at each other on social media, or it's a corporate record, that can be really useful as well. All right, so that's the first step. Add a new selector in. It's going to be able to kind of tell you any place that you might have seen that selector already in your case data. But now what happens when we go out and do our browsing work, Hunchly will actually be scanning all of the underlying source code and content of every page, looking for these selectors, and will automatically track hits for you. So if you start to get fatigued or tired because it's like 38 degrees Celsius in your house, don't worry. If you're missing stuff, Hunchly will be coming along, picking it up, and filing it away for you. So before I demonstrate that in the browser, I just want to show you one setting that may interest some of you. So if we go back into settings, we have this highlight selectors option. So what this will do if we turn this on is it will highlight the selectors on the page for you. So it's visually obvious where those selector hits are. This setting will actually store the highlighting in your evidence permanently. Now, if you don't want it stored in your evidence permanently, so if you work in law enforcement or you work in any way where your materials could be brought into court as evidence, you would want to use on remove before storing. So you'll see it visually in the browser, but you won't see it in the dashboard afterwards in your captures. So I'm going to set it to on remove before storing, and we'll just pop over to our browser. I'll fire it back up. All right, we're just going to do a search again for Justin Sites. I didn't have the extension turned on. That's a good reminder. Cool. So there's our selector highlighting. Very obvious now where that name is present. And the social media, jms.py, my Twitter account, of course, I'd popped in there as well. Now, if you don't like this highlighting, it's not for everybody. You can always kind of see that there's this little red badge that shows up. If you ever see that pop up in your Hunchly extension, you click on your extension, you can go into selectors and you can see which selector hits were detected on the page. And sometimes Hunchly will pick up selector hits in content that you actually don't visually see here. You would have to like right click and go view source. So this is really nice kind of to know as well that sometimes you'll be like, where's the selector hit? And you can look at the source of any of these pages that you're capturing back in your page review screen. So this is really handy. As I'm going out and browsing, it is automatically tracking those hits for us and doing that highlighting. Now, if you discover a new piece of information, which I hope you do when you're investigating, so for example, if we wanted no starch press to become a selector, I can highlight that on the page, right click, Hunchly to, store text as selector. Okay, so that's going to automatically file away this selector. I don't have to leave my browser and kind of switch back and forth between the dashboard. I can just add that as a selector and I can keep on doing my investigative work. All right, going back here, we can see that the counts are increasing all on their own. We see no starch press has been added in as a selector, and I can easily filter down to see those new hits or anything that was interesting there. All right, perfect. So I do see a couple of questions that have come in. Yeah, very good. So how can I add and maintain selectors via CSV file? So I want to be able to add multiple selectors before I start working on a case. So it might be IPs, domains, anything like that. Very good question. So how our kind of threat intel researchers, cybersecurity researchers do this is they might have a report or they might have, something like it's got a list of IOCs, whatever it might be. So in your selector menu, go to bulk add. And this is where you can crack open that CSV you have and just go down one column and grab all of your IOCs and paste them in here. So it might be IP addresses, it might be domain names, it might be whatever it is. Like it could be a threat group, it could be whatever you like. They can all get dumped in here one after the other from a spreadsheet. Hit save, and then all of them will be imported. So that's generally how folks do it, is they have a spreadsheet of selectors or information, they just copy and paste it in bulk. And there's no limit to the number of selectors that you have in a case either. All right. Oh, it looks like some sort of baseball thing just popped up. Windows seems to add new widgets like every second day to Windows. I don't know what's going on there. All right, so hopefully that helps. It's like possessed now, it's just opening on its own. All right, so hopefully that helps with that one, Freddie. Cool. All right, another question. If we have turned on capture and we browse quickly through pages, Hunchly could miss recording some of the pages. Yes, so, and the question is larger also, is it because of insufficient memory or something else? So the thing is that if you're browsing really aggressively fast, is that Hunchly needs to see that initial page load occur. So it needs to see that, the page is loaded and ready for capture. So if you're really quickly or even using code in an automated way to like quickly flip between pages, you will see that Hunchly just isn't able to kind of get in there, grab a capture before you move on. So one strategy I recommend, depending on how you're doing that capture, is making sure that if you're doing those kind of bulk captures, pop a new tab for each one of those URLs you're capturing. So if you're using a tool like Link Clump or some other Chrome extension to kind of open a bunch of links all at once, make sure you're popping it into a new tab. That will force that tab to fully load so that Hunchly captures it fully and it can actually see it. Okay, so hopefully that helps around that workflow. And if you do run into issues around capture in that way, reach out to our support team. It's just support@hunch.ly, and we can definitely look into if there's something else going on there. All right. Another question, can a selector be a sentence? It can be, but selector hits are exact matches. So it would mean that you would need an exact match. So that it would have to be written exactly like this in the content. So, but you could do it, definitely. All right. Now, this is another great question. Does anything about the way Hunchly works tip off targets to the fact that some kind of automated capture is occurring? That's a great question. So the answer is yes, in short. So I spent a lot of years in cybersecurity working on kind of the offensive side, so writing exploits, penetration tests, that kind of thing. So we would write kind of very extensive browser fingerprinting so that if we had a victim, and I'm using air quotes, victim, browse to our bad site, that we would have as detailed information about their browser, anything that we could detect in terms of language packs, anything at all. And I do say that if an attacker can kind of fingerprint how their own web page is loading and anything that might also be loaded alongside or in it, there is definitely the potential that they'd be able to tell that you have an extension installed of some kind. They might even be able to develop a specific technique around Hunchly itself. So I don't want to say no, that, yeah, that's not possible, because it very much is possible. I used to do this all the time. However, I am not aware of any kind of reports or anything where there has been specific fingerprinting done on Hunchly or anything along those lines. But it is worthwhile if you're doing like cybersecurity related research into threat groups or you're hanging out in dark web forums, that kind of thing, really thinking through like, what could I possibly be exposing and what could be the end result, right? So I think it's one of those things, and I'm not an operational security expert, but I think that it really depends on what you're doing and kind of what type of research you're looking at. But it's always safe to assume that attackers are going to be 10 steps ahead of both browser developers and security software and everything else. And if they want to, they're going to figure out a way to fingerprint the use of Hunchly or other tools as well. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, I'm going to take a quick sip of water here and then we'll carry on. All right. Oh, one more quick question. What happens when you're using multiple screens? Not an issue. You can have multiple screens. Only run one instance of Chrome under one profile, though. So Hunchly can't run with multiple Chrome profiles competing at the same time. So just one Chrome profile. You can have as many windows open as you want and as many tabs, but multi-screen isn't impacted. Cool. All right. So that's selectors. Let's talk about tags. So tags are a way to keep your cases organized. I don't use them on every case, but I always kind of use this rule of thumb. Like once I get about 100 pages deep, I start building out tags. And particularly if you're in law enforcement or you're working in a situation where you'll have to provide some of your page captures as evidence, it is much easier to go through organized pages than it is to go through 1,000 pages just lined up in your history view. So this is where tags can really help with that. They're very simple to create. So we can create one for social media, for example. We could create one like hacking if we wanted. And really all this does is allow when we're doing our page capture, so when we're kind of moseying our way around, taking a look at stuff. So let's go take a look here. Twitter, feel free to say hello on Twitter. All right. So here's my Twitter profile. Now, this I would tag with social media. So in my Chrome extension, I can go into tags and say social media, right? As I'm browsing around, I can be filing stuff away like that. Now, another kind of super tag we have is marking pages as important. We do that by clicking right here on this gold star. So you see this gold star right beside the case dropdown, click that. That will mark this page as important. So if we go back and look at our dashboard, we can now see right here, this was social media tagged. Also, this gold star here is saying this is marked as important. I can filter. So I can click on that tag and say, just show me the pages marked with social media. Very nice. I can also mix and match them with selectors. So to do a bit of data analysis, I could say, show me all the pages tagged social media that include ESME sites as a selector. For example, we don't have any because I would hope that ESME does not have an internet presence, or we have a lot of major problems at the site's household. All right, so that's great. Now, if you ever want to, for example, go in and you want to tag a page that, like retroactively, the page that you had captured previously, by expanding this panel, down here we have our tags, so we can say hacking here, or we can remove a tag, whatever you like. So it's not a matter of like you have to browse back to this page just to tag it again. You can always do it from within your dashboard. So this will make your life easier. You're also going to see later, to do case exports, you can actually just say export all the pages I tagged with social media, or export all of the pages I tagged with important. Okay. Also, clicking this button here will just show you only the important pages in your history view. So I use the important marker a lot. Not everybody does, but I like it because it's just one button I can click. I can just see the stuff that I thought was important right away, and I can export based on it. All right. That's tags. They work just like tags in pretty much every other product or website out there. So nothing too fancy there. But you can, if you're working in a team, in your settings panel, I will mention this, you can create default tags. So this means, for example, if I want a social media tag and I want a, I don't know, IOC tag for the cyber researcher, right? Now, every new case I create is automatically going to have these two tags set up for me. So if I'm working on a team, we can actually standardize our tags if we want everybody to use the same ones. It can be really nice because then you're not kind of going through that setup step every time you create a new case. All right, looks like we got some questions. So let me just have a quick read here. All right. Can Hunchly run in a virtual machine and on the host system with one license? Absolutely. So Hunchly's licensing is to the user. So you as the user, when you receive a Hunchly license, you can install it on as many machines, virtual machines, cloud-based desktops, whatever you like. No issue there whatsoever. Great. Another question. So shouldn't Hunchly know that Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are social media? It should come with predefined tags, right? So this is a great question. And same thing, yes, you can bulk add tags in the same way here. This is a great question. So originally Hunchly's tagging did work like that somewhat. So it would, when you were on Instagram, if you tagged an Instagram post with social media, it would then tag anything else you browse to on Instagram.com with social media. The problem was is it actually created a lot more noise. And in order to really say, okay, this is social media and this isn't, we could definitely do that for the major social media platforms. But once you kind of get away from those, it's not actually super easy to categorize sites without leveraging some third-party API or having this massive database of things inside of Hunchly that it knows what every domain is. So we opted instead to remove that auto tagging feature and instead let people manually tag them so that it's a lot more fine-grained, so you know exactly what's actually going into your tagged materials. But that's a great point, Freddie. Thank you. Cool. Great. So how does Hunchly manage timestamps, time zones, and coordination of evidence if they're in different geographic regions? So Hunchly doesn't. It doesn't do any coordination or anything like that. All it's doing is saying, this is my computer time locally. That's the timestamp that goes into the actual capture. So whatever your machine is set to for a time zone is exactly what's being captured. We don't take any other kind of like time stamping, time zone adjustments, anything like that. it's really up to the investigator when they're submitting their evidence to explain that this was taken from this particular time zone. So again, that part is definitely, we have to kind of leave that up to the investigator themselves. So hopefully that helps explain that one. And what else do we got? Cool. All right, we got a couple questions that we'll deal with in a little bit. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you for all the feedback and suggestions as well. This is great. Perfect. Okay, cool. So we covered selectors and tags. Let's talk about notes. So notes are a way for you to put some context into what you're actually capturing and what you're investigating. So these are really nice. They're very simple to do and super useful later on when you're doing case review or building reports in Hunchly. So how do we take a note? Well, when we're on a page like this, if it's of interest to us or we want to kind of keep it in our investigative log, we're going to right click, go to the Hunchly 2 menu, and we're going to say take note. This will pop this box up and we can say Justin's Twitter account, right? This is often how I take a lot of my notes as I'm kind of kicking around. I'll just take notes like this. And it's really nice because in my dashboard, I get this chronological view of things that I thought were interesting or things I wanted to check back in on. And it's really cool. It takes a screenshot, captures the full materials behind it, and it captures our note text itself. We can edit this note text if we want. We can also export it if we want. And later you will see that we can actually pull this note into a Hunchly report. So I generate a ton of notes. I know lots of our journalism, law enforcement folks, regular like kind of civilian investigators as well. Taking lots of notes is something I think people discover is really powerful and really useful while you're doing your work. And it's also able to do it retroactively. So if you want to go back to some page that you were on here and you wanted to take a note of this because you want to include it in a report, you can click this plus button. Same thing, Justin's Bellingcat profile. Okay, cool. Same thing, it'll take a screenshot. It links the note back to that page capture, and we have this nice chronologically ordered set of notes that tells us kind of what we were thinking or what we were doing. You can put as much text in here as you want. But I do recommend developing a bit of muscle memory around taking notes. It's super useful. And also, if you step away from a case for a little bit and you come back to it, being able to go through these notes can get you back up to speed on that case very quickly. So it's a very simple to use feature, and it's something that like often I'll be just working away taking notes from here. It's really later on that like future Justin thanks current Justin for taking these notes and being able to go back through them at some point in the future. All right, very simple. And again, as I mentioned, we can export these and we can include them in reports and use them in a bunch of wild ways. All right. Cool. I don't see any questions about notes. I'll just pause for a couple seconds to make sure no one's typing out a question. It doesn't look like it. Cool. So let's talk about images. So Hunchly handles images in a few different ways. The first is, as you're browsing around doing your thing, Hunchly's extracting every image off of every page. It hashes it and stores it separately. So in your main Hunchly data folder, there's actually a folder called Photos. It has got every image from every page you've ever browsed to in there. So if you work in forensics, law enforcement, anything like that, or you work in child sexual abuse investigations, you can take that whole folder and throw it at your image analysis tools and let it do its thing. So that can be really useful also as from a workflow perspective. But one of the cooler things is that when it does that extraction, it's also looking for EXIF metadata in those images. So in this case, it's pulled up like some random, these look like Instagram maybe or something from Google that's picking up an icon. But we have this picture of myself and it's got EXIF metadata in it. And we can see date and time digitized. So this is actually accurate. I haven't messed with this metadata. We can see information like it was BlackBerry. Whoops, I clicked away, sorry. BlackBerry right there. BlackBerry Classic, in fact. I was the last human on Earth with a BlackBerry Classic in 2015. So this can be really useful from an investigative perspective. It can give you leads that you may not have had otherwise. And it definitely saves you the time of having to like manually scan all of the images for EXIF metadata. It's important to remember that that EXIF data can be manipulated by a bad actor to intentionally throw you off. So you have to kind of treat it as anything else. It's like an unconfirmed piece of information. You'd want to go out and try to corroborate as much of the data that you see in there. If you ever want to test this, like really stress test it, go to Ars Technica. It's a tech journalism site. They have this stuff loaded with metadata, loaded. We were able to geolocate William Shatner based on GPS coordinates that were actually stamped into images on Ars Technica's homepage. So Ars has a ton of metadata, and it gives you like great samples of like examples of what that metadata can look like. So here's like, it's telling you date and time of when this picture was taken. Sometimes if you're really lucky, you will get GPS coordinates, at which point we'll build you a little link to a map that tells you where that photograph was taken, artist name, you can see all kinds of stuff. So this is really great, again, to be able to kind of just go in and see, for example, like what you're seeing. The other nice thing is that this metadata is stored in our full text index. So when we go to search for something, we can go to BlackBerry, for example, and it returns this image. It's telling you that this image contained the term BlackBerry in the metadata, for example. So that can be really useful as well. All right, cool. Any questions about that so far? I see one question. Any more about those images in particular with EXIF metadata? Oh, Stranger Things season 4, it broke my heart. Okay, nothing? All right, so there's one other thing we can do with images. When we see a picture of interest, so it might be a boat, might be a gun, might be a human being, we can right click on it, Hunchly to, and say add caption to image. So Stranger Things poster. Cool. So now this image will actually be isolated for us in our dashboard in this captioned images tab. It will make it a little easier later when we're doing reporting or when we're doing exports. It's nice to have an investigative gallery at times, depending on what we're looking at. So that can be really definitely something that can be useful. And definitely, I mean, if you think of kind of some of the ongoing investigations out there in the world right now, things like investigating Russian oligarchs, right? There's like asset tracing and all kinds of fun stuff going on. So having a gallery of like, here's their home here, here's their yacht here, here's the office building they own, whatever it might be. These are all kind of common things that an investigator will do and can be really useful here in these caption images as well. All right, perfect. So I got some questions here. Does image analysis provide hooks to look for potential steganographic information? So for those of you who've never heard that term before, steganography is basically you have a picture like this Stranger Things thing. I can write code over top of it that won't visually alter the picture. It'll still look exactly like this, but I've actually embedded a message for, say, somebody in this webinar. And so on the other side, the person takes that image, they run different code over it to extract that message out. So no, we don't have any Stego related hooks or anything like that. But of course, you could totally take that entire photos folder in your Hunchly data. So no hooks required, just process all of the images here using your Stego tools, or if you're using image forensic tools or whatever, you can definitely just bulk feed them in from here. All right, cool. Does it capture metadata from videos? No, great question. So we cannot actually extract video. This is largely due to copyright reasons. We can't extract and yank video off of all of the major platforms out there, sadly, without running into issues, particularly with Google. And since Google is the one responsible for distributing our extension, it's just not something that we can do. So we don't do any video extraction, nor any metadata analysis from videos, but you can easily download videos manually and add them as attachments. I'll show you how to do that. And of course, if you have other tools for processing videos, that can make your life easy too. Cool. All right. Would it be helpful to block ads and stuff while browsing? Um, that's a great question. So generally, I do not use an ad blocker if I am doing any research or investigative work that could be going to court, because ad blocker is actually changing the evidence. So it's actually changing what the real web page looks like. So depending on if you're like a cyber threat researcher and you're building internal reports or client reports and it's not stuff that's going to court, for example, I mean, feel free to use an ad blocker. I'm not an expert on ad blocking or even like browsing safety, but I don't use any other extension while I'm doing evidence capture that in any way could change how a website behaves or looks. So hopefully that helps to answer that a little bit. All right. And one last one. Any problems going into court using Hunchly, pros and cons? No, we have not heard any issues internationally. So Hunchly's deployed on every continent except for Antarctica, and it might even be used there. We have not heard any reports back of like evidence from Hunchly being dismissed or not permitted. And we do have an evidence guide in our knowledge base at support.hunch.ly. This evidence guide walks you through how we do everything and kind of the relevant pieces as it relates to submitting to court. But every week, cases go to court in a number of jurisdictions with Hunchly evidence, and we haven't heard any issues yet. We definitely keep our ear to the ground on those things. Naturally, it's the most critical part. After Hunchly does its thing, that last mile being court admissible is really important. So yeah, no major issues. The big thing is like understand what it is you're presenting in court and why it is why you're doing it this way as opposed to taking a screenshot, for example. All right, cool. Yeah, so someone had just asked a support-related question about Hunchly crashing on one computer and working on another. Please send any support-related questions to support@hunch.ly, as I won't be able to address them here on this webinar. Awesome. Okay, thank you. Cool. So that's images. Now let's move on and talk about attachments. All right. So attachments are any files or anything really that isn't a web page that Hunchly might encounter. So there's a couple ways that we can manage attachments. The first is we can manually add them to a case. So if you want to make sure a file makes it into your Hunchly case for when you export, you can just click that button. We can pick an image or anything. So for example, well-known OSINT researcher, Andrew Fordred, very big Maltego user. Last step of Andrew's cases is he takes his Maltego graph and he adds it manually into his Hunchly case, then he exports his Hunchly case. So this ensures that he's actually got a forensic copy of his Maltego graph, and everything for his investigation is now bundled up into one file with his Hunchly case. So that's one way that someone uses this. So you'll note here we have the file name, that we added it manually, and then there's the hash. So the hash is important to make this actually admissible. Now, a word of warning. I clicked on cute.jpg, and you get this warning come up that says, hey, this is going to open in an external program. Do you want to do that? Now, if you click OK, and this is a backdoored Word document, it's maybe even a JPEG that's using a vulnerability in how Windows processes JPEGs. As soon as you click OK, that's going to mean that whatever code was embedded or whatever bad stuff was there is going to execute on your computer. So that's why we put that warning in place. In this case, it's just me bottle feeding a baby raccoon. So I can actually annotate that. And I recommend you do this. Annotate your files, or you're just going to have a huge table of files and not know what any of them are used for. So this is Justin bottle feeding smudge. Perfect. So now I have it annotated. There's another thing to note too, is that we have mobile apps for iOS and Android. Those mobile apps are like little secure containers. They don't do capture, so you can't have an extension running on a mobile yet in the way that we need to. But what it allows you to do, or a victim or a witness, is they can take screenshots or other materials from their mobile device and put them in a Hunchly case. You can import it here, and they'll show up in your attachments view. All right, so there's one other thing as it relates to attachments, and particularly my workflow, a setting that I enable. So I'm going to show you this setting. Open up settings, right here, attach downloads. So what this will, it's off by default for all of you, by the way. For security reasons, I'm going to turn this on and hit save. So what this is going to do is as I'm out browsing around, so file type docx, and I'm going to say we're getting a new puppy, so an Aussie Doodle. All right. I have no idea what this is. It's a Word document though, so I'm going to download it. So now that I've downloaded this file, Hunchly picks the download up, hashes it, timestamps it, and sticks it into our attachments view for us. So we can now see that we have this file here that's been downloaded. It tells you the source of where you downloaded it from, which is important, and we have a hash. Okay, so now we can actually annotate that file uh, if we want, and of course we can open it for viewing if we want. And this file will now go out with our Hunchly export. When we export our entire case, this file is going to go with it. So it's a nice way. I have that setting turned on by default in my investigative environment because I prefer that. As I'm downloading stuff, it's just automatically going into my case for me, and I can be annotating it if I want, and it's just ready for me. I'm not missing anything, particularly if I'm doing corporate investigations that might involve downloading all kinds of different documentations or stuff from investor relations, PowerPoint slideshows, all that fun stuff. So that's where that can be really useful. And I definitely encourage you to go check out our mobile app too. It's helped a number of victims and witnesses, in particular around harassment and domestic violence. So it's free. You don't even need Hunchly to go through the materials or anything like that either. It's just something we built and kind of put out there for the community. All right, I'm going to take a quick water break here. So if you have questions, definitely ask it. I'm going to just pause for about 10, 15 seconds and then we'll carry on. All right, and we're back. No questions, that's great. We'll keep moving. So the searches panel. So what this is telling you is what did you search for and on what search engine or social media platform did you search for it on? Now, the reason we have this here is not only to assist you in doing case review, but it also helps to make you more thorough. One of the things I'm really bad for, even teaching these demos a bazillion times, is that I only end up using Google for a search engine in a lot of time, in a lot of cases. So this is a good reminder to go off to other search engines like Yandex and run the same searches, right? So all we're doing is we're looking for the search terms you're using, what search engine you're using them on. And again, this can really help you when you're kind of doing case review, or even if you feel like you hit that investigative brick wall. I will kind of come in here and take a look around, see what keywords I search for. I'll also, in a lot of cases, I'm bad for this. I'll notice that I haven't even searched for any of these other selectors, right? Like no search for jms.py yet. So it's a good reminder for me, go do a quick search for jms.py, try a couple of different search engines as well, and that might yield some different results. And a perfect example here is that, yes, Twitter showed up high in Yandex, but the number 2 result and maybe the number 3 result actually now are both pirated copies of my second book. So you're going to pull up additional information or things that these search engines use different algorithms for ranking. So it's really a good idea to try to be as comprehensive with your searching as possible. All right. And you can get rid of duplicates too if you want, just by clicking this. That'll get rid of them. All right. Cool. I don't see any questions about this search panel. It's actually just kind of a convenience thing more than anything, and a thorough check, I guess. I'm going to carry on, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. Let's talk about the data tab. So while you're browsing around doing your thing, Hunchly is actually sweeping through all the underlying source code, looking for specific patterns. So these might be patterns that indicate there's a Google Analytics code, for example. And if we kind of drill down into that code, we can see it was used on the support page for Hunchly. This one was used on Bellingcat. So we can actually do further searches in other tools like IntelliX or, I'm trying to think, public dub, Risk IQ. There's a ton of different services that we can actually run this code in, and it might tell us where this code was used on other domains. So we're looking for things like hidden services, email addresses. So there was the journalist that wrote that article at ours. I can apply this as a filter, and this will show me here in my history view. Ooh, and an actual little small user interface thing right there. You see our badge is the wrong color. I will have to note that for Phil. Cool. So this can be really handy as you're kind of drilling down into this data to look for things and look for opportunities to pivot your investigation or to kind of explore other tools that you might have available to you. Now, somebody also mentioned in the questions earlier was, could you talk about using Spiderfoot? I'm a new Spiderfoot user, and they do mention Hunchly. So what Spiderfoot does is they have an import tool that will actually take in all of this data and kick off scans against it. So I don't have time, and I'm not able to actually. And I mean, I could probably bring Steve on to actually show us how this all works. But what you can do is you can export that data in your export menu. All extracted data is CSV. Hit export. And in the Spiderfoot HX, so the cloud-based version of Spiderfoot, there's an importer that says Hunchly data. You can pull that CSV in and it'll kick off scans for you. All right. Cool. Great. Great. Oh, Phil's actually on the webinar. So I feel like I'm going to get heavily trolled now for like the next 5-10 minutes. All right. Perfect. Thanks, Phil. Awesome. You're welcome, Terry. Cool. Yeah, cool. So someone's just asking, is there a way to get a summary of what the search engines used were or anything like that? Nope, but that's a great suggestion that we'll take note of, being able to get kind of a summary view of what you search for and where instead of just a table. Great idea, something we can definitely discuss. I like that. Cool. Yes, Phil, I'm going as fast as I can, all right? Phil's Phil's reminding me that we are deep into the 1 hour session and we still have a few things to go. It's always nice to have team backup on these things, you know, really, really take it to you. All right. So those are all the wild and wonderful ways we get data into Hunchly. Now we can talk about exporting. So I already clicked over here. I'm going to come back now, click again. This export menu is where all the magic happens on getting data out of Hunchly. Now, the first thing I want to point out, and the most important button, is export case. This is something you should do at the end of every workday, truly. This is how I kind of do it, and it really will make your life simple later on to be able to have backups of your data. If you delete anything from Hunchly, we have no ability to restore it. And also, if your computer crashes, naturally, that goes without saying, we don't possess magic skills in the data recovery field that your IT person does. So it's important, export your cases. If you're working on something at the end of the day, just kick it out to an export, throw it on your backup server. The export is simply a zip file. Now, in Windows, just for Windows people listening, don't just double click this. So right click, extract all. The reason for that is that on Windows, if you double click it, Windows will just open it like a regular folder, and it won't work the same way on the inside, basically, is how it works. It's not a real folder, but Windows makes you think it is. So right click, extract all. For Mac, a very sane operating system, you just double click it and it'll unzip it for you. It's really nice. So this is what a case export looks like. If you're looking for anything in particular, it's very easy to find, right? Your attachments, whatever else you want or need, your note screenshots, tag photos, all that fun stuff. The other cool thing is by opening this report, so it's going to kick open Edge. This is like a miniature dashboard that gets shipped out with your exports. So all of your critical information is here. The pages you captured, notes you took, photos you might have captioned, and your attachments. They're all in here. So this means you can take this zip file and you can actually just send it to somebody, whether it's an attorney or a colleague or whatever it is. You can send it to them and they can actually go through your case without Hunchly at all. And when they're in the case and they're kind of scrolling through and looking at stuff and going, yeah, okay, cool, they can click on one of those pages. And what they're seeing is out of the export. This is not reaching out to the open internet. It's not loading anything. it's actually just loading it straight up from your export, as you will see here, right? Justin Sites folder, which is our export pages, and that particular page. So you just need a Chromium-based browser to view these pages like this. As you saw, I just cracked it open in Edge. That's the default on my machine. So really, really nice to be able to ship this off to people. Same thing for Hunchly Mobile. When you export a case from Hunchly Mobile, it looks like a slimmed down version of this dashboard where you just have attachments. All right, very nice. Now the other cool thing is that now that you have a case export, I can, for example, take this case I'm working on, I can ship it over to Julio, and Julio can now go in here to this menu, select import case. You can create a new case from it. You can add it to an existing case to merge cases if you want. Pick the zip file, hit import, go grab a coffee, come back, and all the pages, notes, everything will be back in the dashboard for you. So whether it's sending it to a colleague or even just as most court cases work, you do your investigation work today, you might not see the inside of a courtroom for 6, 18, 24 months currently. So being able to pull that case back in later and review everything is super useful as you prepare for a court or a hearing of some kind. All right, cool. Any questions about full case exports? I do see one. Do you have to turn on that report function in the settings, or is that automatic? Nope, that report that goes out, that little miniature dashboard, that's automatic. That's by default in all full case exports. Great question. I don't see any other questions. Nothing there so far. Okay, cool. So that is really important. Being able to export cases, definitely do that at the end of every day if you can. Great idea. Now let's talk about custom export. So this is where we can get selective with the stuff that we're exporting. As I mentioned before, we have our data down there. We can export caption images. We can export our notes. There's a few different options there. What most folks use this for is for exporting pages, kind of the core thing that Hunchly does. Now you can see there's some nice options here. We can say export all page captures or just things that were marked important or social media or hacking, for example. Really, really nice. So this is the first way that we can actually produce page exports. And in here, when you do this, it's going to produce PDFs and the MHTML in your export. So you're going to get both. All right, so that's kind of the first option that people will use. You can also see, very handy to have tags set up. This will let you kind of just export stuff like that, right, that are marked social media, for example. So this will make your life a lot easier. So that's the first way that you can export pages. The next way is actually directly from your history view. So what we can do here, and I can clear that out. So if I want to capture, or sorry, export a couple of pages here, I can pick that one from Yandex. Maybe I'll grab that one too, and the Aussie Doodles. And I can just click page export. So you can just pick the folder. This is just at the desktop. Cool. It's going to produce the PDF and MHTML for those pages that I selected. Very nice. I'll show you what those look like. So here's our exported pages. Nice. There's all the PDFs and the MHTML. Now with PDFs, you're going to get a bit of metadata at the top of your PDF that describes the page. So let's see if we can zoom in a little bit here. All right, URL, date captured, hash, last time it was updated, useful, and then the content down here. So this doesn't look too bad, but sometimes the conversion between HTML and PDF does not go cleanly. PDFs were never designed to do HTML. They're actually two totally different standards. So you can run into issues occasionally where a PDF just looks a little wonky or it's got a page break in the wrong spot. So that's why having those MHTML captures are really handy, because it's going to be a much more accurate reflection of what you had captured at that point. Okay, so that's nice. All right, and I'll point out one more thing. If you're in your page review screen, you can export pages from here. So this is where you can select MHTML or PDF. So you got an or. All right, same thing, pick the spot where you want it to export and it will kick it out for you. All right, let's see, questions. Great question. So the question was around working with malicious URLs or content. is there a way within Hunchly to defang the extension or other things? No, we don't do any defanging or anything like that in our URLs. We don't manipulate anything. So there's not anything like that in Hunchly that we manage. We're definitely all ears if you have suggestions on how you would like that to work. So defanging is commonly, if you've ever seen a URL that's got like square brackets around the dots, or it's basically the URL, but it's got some of the characters replaced or moved around. That's called defanging, and you'll see it commonly with cybersecurity researchers when they're passing URLs back and forth. But we don't do any of that in Hunchly in particular. So we really try not to mess with anything that is going by, and we try to basically do our best to put a little bit of user experience around warning users about opening files and that kind of thing, but we don't defang anything or change any of the content. All right, cool. Awesome. All right. All right, so the next question was about the report. So if you're referring to the question was, do you open the report and save as PDF, or how do you send that report to a client? You don't just send this report to a client, you send the entire zip file to the client. So that report is only going to be living because of where it's located. It needs to be able to read the stuff from these folders. So you don't send that report, you send that whole zip file if someone wants to review all the materials you collected. All right, cool. Great questions today. This is awesome. Now, the last thing we will cover, our report builder. So the report builder is designed to create simple, quick reports. This is not a replacement for Microsoft Word or LibreOffice or any other Google Docs, anything like that. This is really designed to create short, simple reports, or if you need to kind of kick something off to a colleague very quickly, this is where you can do it. So our report builder is pretty intuitive. We're going to add a title. So we're just going to say Evil Justin. Cool. Now I'm actually going to add a title page. So you can see up here we have this option. So I'm going to click Add Title Page. And we're going to say Justin Seitz was the author. And we're going to go Hunchly Inc., not an actual company. I can add a logo here if I want to. I'm not going to do that today. So I can fold that section up. And now, for example, maybe I want an executive summary section. All right. So executive summaries generally just have text in them. So this is a pretty awesome report. You can see I'm just adding text in. That's what that option here, add text box, does for us. That's it. That's my entire executive summary. We'll call it quits there. All right. Now we have an untitled section down here, and you can add as many sections as you want, by the way, or remove them. Boop. Cool. So I'm going to call this evidence. And now this is when I can start pulling in case data. So I'm going to go add case data. All right. So we have a few ways of kind of digging through our case data. We have our main kind of types here. So attachments, our caption images, for example, our notes. So let's grab this note, and I'm going to grab this Stranger Things poster. Okay. And I'm going to add these two to the report. Nice. So now I have them here in this evidence section, and I can kind of keep doing that. So I can also be using things like selectors or tags to filter down into those particular types. So for example, if I wanted all the pages that had Justin Seitz for a selector, that's going to pull the screenshots up when I was on those particular pages. So I'm able to grab that one there if I want and add it to the report, right? These big Google search URLs drive me nuts too. Crazy stuff Google does sometimes. So we can reorder these around by dragging them and dropping them if we want. If we want them in a different order, we can add a text field underneath or in between them if we want. And we can kind of build this report out exactly like this, adding sections, adding content. And for example, we can also even add our capture history if we want. So we can pop in our capture history, which is like a running history of everything we looked at. I can move this history down. So if I want it at the bottom of my report, which is typically where I want it, I can put it there. All right. And then I can export. So there's two options. We have PDF and we have Word. So if you're doing a quick report, you want to just kick it out to somebody, you can use PDF. You can include a table of contents if you want. Hit export. I'm going to pick the desktop here. We'll just call this Justin Sites report. Hit save. Cool. It's done. It's out. I can go email that file. We'll take a look at it shortly. However, my workflow, I use Word. The reason for that is I have an investigative template, a report template that I've used for years and refined. So I'll export my Hunchly report to Word. I'll open it on the left-hand side of my screen. I'll open my regular report template on the right. And as I'm report authoring, I'm pulling over materials from my Hunchly report directly into it. So this is what I have found for me works the absolute best. And until we build all of Microsoft Word into our report builder, it is good to just kind of think about, your workflow, how these reports fit into that workflow, what's easiest for you and what you do most commonly. This is what works for me. Other people will build very quick reports in Hunchly. That's all they ever do. And it's just PDF. So if we crack open the report, we'll see this is what I just exported. Cool. I hate that little side panel. All right, there's our report, organization, when it was prepared, our table of contents. I can go down into evidence. We can see our notes. Okay, it's got all the information there in that note panel. Page capture, images, caption images, all that stuff is in here for us as we scroll down. So very simple reporting method, very easy. This is also easily ingested. So you can take this PDF and fire it into your e-discovery system, for example, and it'll ingest it just fine, pull some of this stuff out for you. Very easy to use. And you can also standardize this reporting environment a little bit. So if, for example, you wanted to have some of those sections already waiting for you and some of that other stuff filled out, in your settings panel, over here on the left, we can see reporting. So this is where I can fill out the author field, organization name, my logo. There's also a document classification. So if, for example, this should be top secret, then that will get stamped into the header and footer of every page of the report when it gets produced. And the other cool thing is that we can actually create default report sections. So we can have a section called executive summary. We can have one called evidence and conclusion. So the next time I create a case and I open up my report builder, these sections are already going to be created, sitting there and ready and waiting for me. Okay, so again, depending on how you use Hunchly, if you're in a team environment, that kind of thing, you may or may not want to build out some of those kind of more templated things into your settings, and everybody can standardize on them. All right, so that is our report builder and a huge chunk of Hunchly's features and functions. We are well over time today. There's been so many great questions. It's awesome. And I still have questions coming in. Just to be clear, this is fully local storage, right? Yes, it is all fully local storage. Hunchly will not, by default, ever connect to the internet on its own. Not for updates, not for license checks, not to load an image, nothing. So you're never going to have Hunchly making a connection on its own. You can, however, configure Hunchly if you are kind of into coding or you've got some infrastructure set up. You can do some integrations with Hunchly, in particular this data forwarding, where Hunchly will actually forward, as you're capturing pages, it will actually send a JSON message out to a server with that page capture detail in it. So you can aggregate it at a database or whatever at some place centrally. So this is for more advanced users of Hunchly. This is the only time Hunchly will talk outbound to the internet. Cool. Can we make our own boxes? I assume that you mean boxes in the report builder itself. And I'm not sure if you mean like text box or if you're just referring to these sections. If you could maybe help explain that question a little bit more, that might help me answer that, or I might have already answered it while I was creating new sections. That's totally fine too. Cool. How about the to-do? All right, so I have a longer question here. Let me just get my scroll box open here. Oh, okay, cool. So this is a bit of a long question, but it was around the use of our to-do lists. So right here. So you can actually create yourself an investigative to-do list. You can be kind of updating it, adding to it, so like check Justin's Facebook. Right now I've got this to-do list item. It's kind of beaconing at me. The other cool thing you can do is in your settings panel, you can actually create default to-do items. So if you work in an environment where your investigations kind of follow the same theme, you can build out a default to-do item list. So like, check open corporates, check Facebook, run tool XYZ, right? So run Spiderfoot, let's say. Okay, so now what'll happen is when I create a new case, all right, so let's just do that. We're gonna say evil Phil. I have those to-do items waiting for me. I already have them there. So you can actually have this templated kind of checklist where you can have those items already sitting and waiting for you. You also note those default tags I created sitting there and waiting for me. And the report builder sitting there waiting for me. Those sections that I defined in my settings. So that's where some of those settings and templating some of those things out can be useful. To-do, tags, reporting. Yep. And the to-do list is Phil's favorite, by the way. And since Phil can't actually speak to y'all, you're just going to have to believe me. Cool. How can we export the data into CSV? Yep, so the extracted data, if it's just the extracted data from this panel down there, actually let's switch our cases here. Go back to Justin. Cool. If it's just this data, you go to custom export. Down here, all extracted data is CSV. Data. Cool. So it'll pop it out there. If you want to actually process all of your case data with code, you can export your case, okay? And in your exported case folder, case data is all CSVs and JSON. So this is for people who are ingesting into eDiscovery, but also who write their own analytical tools so that you can ingest that JSON, the CSVs, whatever you want to do. This is not something we kind of like support, or it's not like a documented thing, but all of the machine generated data is right in this folder for you for a case. All right, hopefully that helps with that. Awesome. Cool. Do we have API documentation? Our API is undocumented, but if you want to use it, it's actually a command line tool. So if you ever want to see an example of how that works, our Hunchly Maltego transforms interact with the API locally. Great place to go and learn from it. And there's also code in GitHub that you can go and read on how you can use Python, for example, to interact with that API. But it is just a binary that gets run. It's not RESTful or anything like that. We are currently re-architecting how that API works so that it is RESTful. All right, cool. Yeah, and Phil pointed out that our Hunchly API, well, I might as well just run it so you can see. All right, let's use. So the Hunchly API, if you just run it or use help, you can see all of the commands here. Okay, so and some of these commands have sub help too. So that's just Hunchly API / it on Linux or Mac OS, and then you can see a bunch of options and you can play around with them there. Cool. All right, all right, all right, all right, all right, all right. It doesn't look like there's any more questions. Phil feels exposed now over their undying love for the to-do list. Any other questions before we sign off? This was an hour 20. This is definitely one of the longer ones. So I appreciate you all hanging in there and hanging out and all of the awesome questions. This has been great. If you have any further questions, definitely check out support.hunch.ly. This is our knowledge base. So I'm going to drop that into chat. We also have our YouTube channel. So a recording of today's session will be on it, youtube.com/c/Hunchly. Pop that into chat. I can hear Phil talking in my headphones. All right, cool. And of course, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us at support@hunch.ly or my own personal address at justin@hunch.ly. Either one of those, and you will get a response promptly and friendly, and probably more knowledgeable if you contact Phil than me, but depending on the day, you never know. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. And please stay tuned for the recording to get popped onto YouTube once it's all done encoding. All right. You're very welcome. Thank you. We appreciate it. And Phil, so you're aware, people are saying thank you for all the hard work done on Hunchly. And it is worth mentioning that Phil and Divya, the rest of the team, they are really the ones that do all of the amazing work on Hunchly. I actually don't write any code for it or even do any design work. My job is just to kind of do this type of stuff. So they definitely deserve all the credit there. They've done an incredible job with the tool over the past few years. Awesome. Thank you so much. I hope for my European friends that it cools off for you soon. I know that's pretty awful. So we're definitely thinking of you here in Canada. All right. Have a good one, everybody. Bye bye.